Here's to a conversation that we were expecting to have on Sunday on governance, but for one person's flight reasons or another, we made sure it could happen anyways. Mehdi and Anthony, I'd like to call you just to the stage, please. About 2 years ago, there was a fireside conversation where the two of them were going back and forth, and it seemed nearly scripted until he said it was not scripted. And even then, when he finished the fireside, they had an encore applause and they kept going for another 15 minutes. So yeah, it's very exciting to be able to introduce these two amazing bastions of industry. But quickly, maybe just introduce yourselves and then I'll leave it to you in a moment. Okay, so Mehdi, who are you? What do you do? And why should we care?
Hey, everyone.
Oh, microphones. Really got you.
Everyone, thanks for having me. Thanks for organizing this great event. Lots of quality people in the room. Bit of a change from commercial conferences. Yeah, my name is Mehdi. I'm a co-founder and director of Sigma Prime. Sigma Prime is a blockchain security and research firm. Been operating in the blockchain space for about 8 years now. We are a provider of security assessments for the blockchain ecosystem, meaning that my team digs into a lot of code bases to try to find bugs, vulnerabilities before the bad guys do. And we're also the founders and maintainers of Lighthouse. Lighthouse being the Rust Ethereum consensus client. It's free, it's open source, and it's currently responsible for 34% of the user market share, which is great and scary at the same time.
Yeah, hi, my name is Anthony Sassano. I'm the founder of something called the Daily Gwei, which is an Ethereum Ethereum educational hub, I should say. I do like a daily YouTube video covering all updates from the Ethereum and crypto ecosystem. I spend a lot of time on Twitter, where I guess a lot of crypto people are, and I just have been doing a lot of education for many, many years now. It's all free, basically. I consider what I do to be what's called a public good within the crypto ecosystem, and I just try to give back to an ecosystem that has given me so much.
Great. Well, I'll leave it to both of you to get started. Mehdi, you have any question you'd like to ask each other, and that'll probably be it, and there'll be...
Yeah, sure. I would really like to get as many questions from the audience as possible. I think Anthony and I would agree on that. So Anthony and I go way back, and we haven't actually caught up in a few months, and I did not want to pick up the phone and give him a call so that this, conversation is quite natural. So I've seen what you've been up to, obviously, with the Daily Gwei. I was just telling Anthony that a bunch of my friends overseas wake up every morning to his lovely podcast, and they've actually learned about this session from his podcast. And I woke up to a bunch of phone calls being like, "You're going to talk to Sassano in Sydney?" I'm like, how do you know? So yeah, I think the topic of this chat is around organizing strangers in a decentralized fashion. We can dive deeper into some of that. But I guess first question to you, Anthony, what do you think has changed significantly in this particular area since we last spoke at that panel about, I think, 18 months ago?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think like 18 months ago when we last spoke, it was March 2022. So about 6 months before the merge was happening in September of 2022, which was and still is, I consider, one of the most difficult coordination games ever played to make the merge happen. And I remember us discussing it at the time, all the work that was going into it, how there had been, I guess technically not delays, but like there had been many different pivots in the roadmap over time that caused things to change substantially. And I think that even it's not even that far back, like 2019, 2020, maybe there was, a huge shift in how the Ethereum protocols coordinated and how they built stuff. It became a lot more organized than it traditionally had been because we had people coordinating. And I think in crypto, there is this thing where people go, oh, we can't have a leader because that's centralized. No, that's not how it works. You can have a leader that coordinates, but that does not imply that centralized, doesn't imply that whatever that leader says is what happens. The leader is there to coordinate the groups of people together, and that's exactly what happened. That's why we actually got the merge in the end, is because we had people step up and be leaders and coordinate. So I think that the biggest thing that has changed maybe since the merge happened was it seems like there was a real big, I guess, invigoration within the core developer and research community, where it was like, we just shipped this major thing that a lot of people said would never happen. A lot of people said it was just impossible to do. It was like changing the engine of a jet mid-flight. So that's some of the analogies that we used, which, to be fair, maybe it is the blockchain version of that. But it was, not to undersell how important it was. But I think since then, there has just been a lot more kind of positivity around decentralized governance within the Ethereum framework, decentralizing our development of things, open source, being able to get more people contributing. You know, since then we've had more teams step up and start building more clients, like the Reth execution client from Paradigm, which is a VC firm that does research and development side of things as well. We had them step up. I think there was a consensus layer client as well. I can't remember the name of it, a new one that was being built. So it basically showed the world, it's like, hey, you know, you can come here, you can join us. Like there's no kind of hierarchy here. And, you know, you just coordinate with us. There's regular calls, there's forums, there's Discord chats, there's everything, right? And then you can have a real impact. So that's what I have noticed since the merger. I mean, it's only been a year and a bit since then, but I mean, from the outside looking in, like I'm not a core developer, you obviously spend a lot more time in that arena. It just seems like people have been invigorated by that.
Yeah, I would agree. And one thing I'd like to piggyback off, and it's the reason why some people in the room may think that the merge was too late or delayed. It's extremely difficult when you're building in the open in a decentralized fashion to turn down people's suggestions, right? If a stranger rocks up to your fortnightly governance call and says, we think that whatever you've been doing is perhaps not optimal. Here's a new solution that you should really be looking into. And you're like 2 weeks away from shipping and you've already built, you're basically in the testing phase. Well, believe it or not, you actually have to listen to that person and really evaluate their ideas based on merit. And not just on timelines or your own agenda. And that is extremely challenging. That's something that would never happen in the corporate world, right? Like you've got project managers, a lot of people gravitate around them, suggest potential directions for the product. But at the end of the day, ultimately, they make the call, right? It ends up in the features list or not. Well, in this case, that decision has to be made as a group. And obviously, people step up. Big shout out to Danny Ryan. Raise your hand if you don't know who Danny Ryan is. Don't be shy. It's okay. Yeah. Danny Ryan is the, I guess, hero that Ethereum doesn't necessarily deserve. He's stepped up around that period, around the merge, Beacon Chain launch period, and has just acted as the ultimate coordinator for execution clients and consensus clients alike. And we've noticed throughout the years, the emergence of talent every now and then when we see that there's something really missing in the puzzle. We're like, wish we had someone who could be that link between research and engineering. A few weeks later, someone shows up and that person has the perfect skill set to really address that need. So there's obviously benefits in welcoming new ideas, new blood in the conversations, but this perhaps explains why things take time when you build that way.
Yeah, and I want to piggyback off the comment you made about how, you know, you put a kind of a request out there and someone comes like a couple of weeks later and just starts doing research on it or starts developing it. I think that for people to do that, you have to have a sense of legitimacy about the ecosystem that you're working in. Like that doesn't happen in every ecosystem. Like if someone in another ecosystem, say it's another layer 1 blockchain, and maybe they basically a dead chain. We call them zombie chains in crypto, right? And they say they need something. The talent pool that they have to pull from is much, much smaller than what Ethereum has to pull from because Ethereum has the legitimacy. Someone doing research and development in Ethereum knows that their work is not just going to hit a dead end in a few weeks, right? It can definitely get legs and eventually maybe make it into the protocol as well. And obviously there'll be more eyeballs on it because Ethereum is so large. And as you said, like it is a merit-based thing where people can come with their ideas and they're not just shot down by some centralized kind of entity or some product manager. They're actually listened to, especially, I mean, because it's merit-based. If their idea is actually really good, as you said, like you'll actually push the timelines out because the idea is too good to ignore.
We've done this so many times.
Yep. And just did it recently with EIP 4844 is this major EIP coming as part of the next upgrade that is going to help scale layer 2s on Ethereum. That got pushed back by a couple of months because someone came along and said, I think there's a much better way to do this. Let's do it. And everyone was just like, okay, well, yeah, this is actually much better. It doesn't matter if it's going to be a couple of months later. And then, yeah, it's been working. I mean, I saw the other day is maybe 1 to 2 weeks away from every client having it implemented and then the testing can start again. But that's what you were saying before about the testing. You're doing the testing and then someone comes along and says, hey, I want to make a big change. And then you got to do the testing again, right?
Exactly. It can be quite challenging, but I'm a strong believer of the way we're coordinating. And I've had the chance to chat and work with some of the greatest minds in this space thanks to this approach. I wouldn't have it any other way. It just makes things a bit slow. But
Yeah, and if there was someone calling the shots, right, they would obviously have a bias towards who they'd want to listen to, who they would give airtime to, who they would bring on to calls and things like that. So the fact that it's just all open, as you said, there are negatives with that. You know, no one wants to see how the sausage is made, so to speak, right? When you see how the sausage is made, you become bearish on the sausage. Like, you're just like, I don't want to eat that sausage. But, you know, from the outside looking in, for a lot of people, they're not seeing that, but they can if they want to, right? But for a lot of other things, like obviously all the centralized companies out there, unless you're actually working within that company and particularly within that division, you're not going to see much of that. And I usually use the analogy of, you know, imagine if you were privy to all of the ongoings of like Apple, all of the inner ongoings of all their major product releases and how many different iterations they go through and how many stupid ideas they come up with that they have to go back on. Like, that's what happens in Ethereum because it is all completely open and transparent. You see every little detail, and that, as I said, comes with the negatives, but also comes with a lot of positives. And I think the positives vastly outweigh the negatives of people just being like, oh, you know, this was silly, or, you know, this was done wrong, blah, blah, blah. That's fine, because that means someone can come along and fix it if they want to. There's no need to just yell into the void and no one can listen to you. You can go there and actually attempt to fix it. And I think there was recently a talk that Justin Drake gave around all the quote unquote like mistakes that were made in designing the beacon chain. And their mistakes, probably a bit of a harsh term, I think, but Justin Drake likes to cause some drama sometimes. But basically all the things that can be considered tech debt that, you know, aren't necessarily major things, but shouldn't have been designed that way. But they were, because at the time that was the best way to do it. But the thing is, the point of me bringing that up is that we have those honest conversations in public, right? It's not like some boardroom kind of in the corner being like, oh, if we say too many things like this, the stock price is going to go down. No, you know, we talk about them very publicly, and then everyone can comment on them, and then eventually changes will come from that.
then crypto journalists just decide to headline Ethereum delayed again.
Yeah, yeah. A lot of those headlines.
For sure. Something I perhaps want to touch on, maybe briefly, so that we can take audience questions, is decentralized funding. So a lot of the actors in this space, contributors in this space, are individuals or, you know, part of companies like ours, relatively small 30 people companies, and I can talk for Sigma Prime. We're heavily reliant on the Ethereum Foundation as our primary donor when it comes to funding Lighthouse. And we've always, you know, realized that this was a massive risk, obviously. And just for those of you who don't know, the Ethereum Foundation's plan, long-term plan, like 5, 10, 15 years, is to basically remove itself from the, I guess, day-to-day operations of Ethereum, even the research of Ethereum. The plan is to ossify layer 1 and hopefully not have too much innovation happen in 5, 10 years' time, and have those innovations hopefully happen on layer 2s, layer 3s, potentially. So yeah, it's always a challenge when you know that your primary source of funding is not going to stick around for that long. How do you, you know, go out and try to make sure that you're able to pay developer wages and all of that? It's, you know, something that I wouldn't say keeps me up at night, but it's certainly something that's top of my mind at the moment.
That's actually one thing that there's been a lot of progress on, I would say. I think that from memory, every single execution layer team and consensus client team are actually separate in terms of entities, like from each other. Yes, they all get funding in some parts from the Ethereum Foundation, but in terms of, as you mentioned, like they're small teams, I believe they're all separate. Like, you know, some of them are under bigger companies, some of them are independent. Obviously, maybe not obviously for everyone, but Geth is at the Ethereum Foundation. But in terms of, I think there's like 10, they're all kind of part of separate entities and funded in different ways. But as you said, the Ethereum Foundation gives grants. They also did an initiative recently where they gave validators based on milestones that the teams reach, so that they can run these validators and actually earn rewards from the network. So that could be a source of ongoing funding. And it was a large amount. I can't remember exactly how much it was.
4,148 value.
Yeah, well, it's a lot. That's the times 32.
A few $1 million.
So that's a lot of share of the network where they can get rewards and obviously fund themselves through that. But then there's also this other initiative that had popped up over, I think it's a year old, maybe a little over a year old now, called the Protocol Guild, which is basically this initiative that's run primarily by a guy called Trent Van Epps and another guy called Tim Byko, who are very active within the Ethereum kind of like core developer space. And what this is it's basically a contract that lives on on chain that people can donate money into, and then that money gets dispersed to the core developers and researchers. So there's over 100 of people that gets dispersed to, and there's over $10 million in there right now. And the cool thing about this is that because anyone can donate to it, you can have the different DAOs in the ecosystem donate to it with their own native token if they, if they choose to do that, or with stable coins or ETH or whatever it is. And the whole goal of that is to basically say, hey, these core developers are the ones building the thing that you've built your products on, and they're doing it in a open source kind of free way. And they should share in the upside of this as well, because a lot of them came later. They didn't get like ETH at $1 or anything like that, right? They do get probably, bonuses maybe from the Ethereum Foundation, things like that based on milestones. But like these people should be getting immensely rewarded for their work. And it's not just a monetary thing, it's also recognition of their work, which I think is even more important than the monetary thing. And the Protocol Guild has an aim of getting to billions of dollars in that, and then basically having it so that it's fully trustless and it just disperses out to the relevant people.
And the pilot was very successful. Shout out to all the projects out there who contributed substantial amounts of their own tokens, Lido, Optimism, and a bunch of others. And this is a very novel way of funding this space. And I'd like to think that we kind of sit at the frontier with Sigma Prime, because we obviously have developers that we pay ourselves as employees of Sigma Prime, but we also have these new methods of alternative funding that are emerging. So our developers are employees of Sigma Prime, but they're also stewards of the Ethereum network. And it's great to see the Ethereum community rewarding that behavior and that responsibility as well. And that's very, very much like, I hadn't seen any similar type of funding mechanism before. And we can talk about things like Gitcoin and quadratic
I was going to say Gitcoin and Optimism does a retroactive public goods funding. There are other initiatives out there, but this one is solely focused on the core developers and researchers, the ones that are building the foundations that we all kind of build our products on, we all use. And as I said, like, it's completely open. You can literally just send money to the contract on chain, and then it just gets dispersed.
Absolutely. Let's see. There's a bunch of people try to break into the space, the Ethereum core development or the Ethereum educational space. It's perhaps slightly harder than what it was a few years ago, don't you think? Just because there's a lot of us now.
Naturally, as you grow in size, it becomes more difficult, I think. And I think as it becomes more technical as well, like, I mean, on the core developer side of things, it's definitely, there's like a lot of things to keep track of. We were discussing earlier about how the Ethereum layer 1 roadmap, and not even talking about everything else, just the layer 1 roadmap is substantial. And most of it is things that actually do need to go into the protocol before, as you mentioned, Ethereum ossifies and we don't really make many changes to the protocol. And these are things that are going to make Ethereum more secure, more robust, more reliable, and so that we can resist any kind of, depending on what you're optimizing for, resisting kind of attacks against the network, resisting kind of perverse incentives like MEV, which is a huge roadmap item, but all these things that are on there. But I think that, it just makes it maybe more of a daunting thing for people that want to break in. They're like, oh, there's so much to it here. But again, it's all open, it's all inviting. You don't have to do the whole thing. You can like go to one little area and specialize, and then you can still add value by doing that.
See, that would be my number one advice. Don't try to do too much. Don't think that you'll actually be able to comprehend the entire roadmap, because I don't think anyone does.
No.
To be quite frank, maybe Vitalik, and if that.
Yeah, I mean, Vitalik's across a lot of things, but and even him, he obviously is not part of the core developers. He's the more of a research side of things, and kind of like researches various different things in the ecosystem. But I mean, I think even him, like, there was a question recently posed on Twitter about how much attention should core developers and researchers pay to the application layer, and I would say that they should have a general understanding of it, but expect them to have an understanding of everything going on at the application layer,
God, no.
It's impossible. It's just like expecting an application layer dev to know what's going on at the core protocol, right? So there has to be a separation of concerns there. There has to be the sharing of the labor there. And I think to date, Ethereum has actually threaded that needle quite well. And that's also why we've pushed scaling to layer 2s, is because we basically said, well, layer 1 needs so much work, and then we're going to have scaling on top of that. Why not push scaling to layer 2, let the layer 2 ecosystem innovate and work on it, and get the funding too, because it's tens of billions of dollars now, I think, worth of funding into these things. And then if necessary, we pull the best ideas into Ethereum layer 1, but then we still have this bustling ecosystem. So yeah, definitely. I think you mentioned earlier about the Ethereum Foundation wanting to remove itself completely. That's the philosophy of subtraction. basically subtracting away as much as possible and only focusing on what you are good at. And I think at this point in time, the Ethereum Foundation is good at just giving money out, right? And funding things and having people that work as contractors and things like that there, but really they are a funding vehicle. They have the ETH that they got from the original I guess people call it a pre-mine, right? Where the original sale took place and they got a portion of that. And that's how they've been funding themselves ever since. There hasn't been another raise for the Ethereum Foundation. They've just been selling the ETH and obviously the ETH price over the long term, logically, should reflect the strength of the network and the value of the network. And then that's how that kind of all plays out there. But I think the same is true. You mentioned education. The same is true. I think like I have a few friends that ask me for advice on it because I've been doing it for so long. And I say to them, like straight up, it's just harder now. Like back when I was doing it when I started in 2018, it was easier to get eyeballs on my content. The community was a lot smaller, but now there's so many different kind of things going on. It's quite difficult. And I know that people can get disheartened when they produce something and maybe they get like 10 people that read it or something like that. It definitely becomes very disheartening for those people. So I think that, yeah, generally that's just the nature of things as you get bigger. But if you do specialize, you can find your audience. Like I think I would consider what I do to be specialized because the show that I produce is very technical, is very in the weeds, it's not beginner friendly, and it's really for people who just want to be right in the weeds, and that's what I've kind of settled into. Whereas you have something like Bankless, for example, that covers a wide range of things. They made it into a business. They have employees, so it's all it really is just about specialization. And I don't think that's unique to crypto. Obviously, it's with everything.
I agree, and yeah, I might totally concur. Specialize, find your niche, but also do not expect success overnight. Put in the time, the effort, understand the topics that you're dealing with. Don't be afraid of, asking questions to the researchers. Don't shy away from complexity, embrace it, and, publish your work, learn in the open, and you'll be surprised. You'll probably, like, if you're good at what you do and if your explanations make sense, you will be contacted by someone in this space who would love to be working with you.
I've seen that happen so many times.
Proto.
I find because I'm so involved in the ecosystem, I typically find people really early on in their kind of career, I guess you could call it.
Nerd sniper.
Yeah. I see them and I'm like, if he was a coin, I'd buy him right now, sort of thing, I'm getting in on the ground floor here. But it's happened numerous times where I've seen them and I'm like, wow, this person is so smart. They know what they're doing. What they're producing is great. And then I see them continue on in their journey and they go on to just do great things, basically. So, and it kind of like warms my heart to see that because I get to see it out in the open. I get to see it all happening in real time. And yeah, it is amazing. As I said, like it's such an open ecosystem. There is no one telling you what you can and can't do. It's all merit based, which I really love. But yeah, I think we take questions from the audience.
Yeah, let's do that. We could be chatting for hours, guys. I'm so sorry. Yeah. Let's pause here and hear from Chloe.
Thank you both so much for being here. As Joey said, your chemistry at Blockchain Week last year was electric. So we're very fortunate for you to get back on stage for the benefit of Block 9. My question isn't really Ethereum specific or even layer 1 specific, but with the theme of the conversation being so focused on coordination and decentralization. And I liked your comment, Anthony, that leadership and centralization are not the same. One of the big, themes for me at the workshops and conversations we've been having this week has been around where foundations are concerned, I think, because foundations are an existing, established, understood method of coordination. There's not so much skepticism around whether foundations are a valid way of coordinating people, but DAOs attract a lot of skepticism and are not very well understood. And so as we move towards a more nuanced conversation where we say, well, it's not a binary of something's either centralized or decentralized. We need to get into the details of across the value chain and through the life cycle of a project, what needs to be centralized or decentralized, and how should those structures evolve to make sense for where the project is at, and as well as the value chain. So, for example, some of the conversations we had this week were around, is it important for assets themselves to be decentralized or just the protocol around them, and those sorts of considerations. So given that you guys have looked at so many projects, I'm really curious to know what's the mental model that you use to conceptualize what good governance and coordination looks like? Like, do you have any heuristics that when you see a new project or team, you go, oh, that's a red flag, terrible model? Or what are kind of some new novel approaches that you're seeing emerging that you think we should be paying attention to?
I'll start. So I think that when you talk just generally about DAOs and governance and things like that, I mean, it's funny that this is kind of topical. We've seen all the drama with OpenAI over the last few days and how even in the centralized corporate world, governance is a mess, right? And it can be co-opted and there's corruption and things like that. And there's all different incentives at play. And we see that play out all the time with DAOs, especially when it comes to, as you mentioned, the assets that the DAO controls. If your DAO is so small that there's only a few people who actually control what happens in it, and there's a lot of assets there, the natural conclusion is that most of the time they're going to try and raid the treasury. And they're not going to do it in a way that's obvious. They're going to do it in a way that's non-obvious, such as, hey, we need to pay these salaries, but the salaries will be very inflated, right? Or, hey, we need to pay this person to do marketing for us or to develop the protocol. And
I just want to say this actually happens.
yeah.
This is not like far-fetched or a fictitious scenario. This actually happened. There's at least 3 DAOs that I can think of that have been drained of their treasury, just like Anthony's describing.
Yeah. Well, no, exactly. It has actually happened. It's not just something that I'm saying for the sake of it. And using the examples, I don't want to call out any projects in particular, but generally that's definitely what happens there. So I think that when I look at DAOs and look at how they're doing things, it's funny where I actually think that the slower the project is moving on the DAO front, the better. Because slow, not always, but a lot of the time implies that there is a lot of decision makers or a lot of people participating in that process where you can't just rush something in, because when you rush things through, it just shows to me that you're very centralized. A few people have total control over things. And even the biggest DAOs suffer from this, unfortunately, because a lot of them, what they do is they'll raise money from like venture capitalists and things like that. And then they'll control the tokens. And if it's all just token weighted voting, well, then they control the protocol essentially, right? And a lot of the time they'll do this thing where they won't vote on most things to make it as if they don't actually have a say. But then on the really important things, they'll come out of nowhere and just like vote in favor of their own kind of thing. And I think some high profile examples of this is Uniswap. Uniswap has a DAO. They raised funding from some big VCs like A16Z and Paradigm multiple times. They own a lot of tokens, these VCs. And there is this whole debate about should Uniswap as a protocol enable what's called the fee switch, which would allow people to stake their Uni tokens and get a share of the protocol revenue for themselves. Now, of course, there are concerns around like, will this make Uni a security, stuff like that. So of course the VCs come along and say, no, we don't want this, right? We don't want this. We're going to vote against this, or they're going to sow divide, so to speak, right? They may not directly vote, but they may post from an account that you haven't seen before and try to sow some divide. And this is just, standard playbooks, I think, when it comes to DAOs. But I would say that, yeah, the slower the DAO moves and the more voices there are, the better it is, I think. But at the same time, it's not always the case. There are exceptions to that rule where there are a lot of voices and then nothing gets done. And I think Bitcoin is probably the very best example here, where I think, I have nothing against Bitcoin, but I think it ossified too early. And I think that happened because there were so many competing voices, so many competing kind of things going on that it was too decentralized. Like, I'm going to compliment Bitcoin here. It's too decentralized. Whereas I think Ethereum actually threads a really nice needle there with it moves slow, like much slower than other chains out there, but it does that because it has that decentralized governance process in place. It doesn't have like token voting or anything like that, but it still has that process, and there are a lot of voices that go into it. So yeah, that's generally how I see things, but Mehdi might have a different view on that.
I totally agree with what you said. And just to make it quick, red flags, multi-sig, 3 out of 5 multi-sig to upgrade something.
Those are the
Red
obvious
flag,
ones, yeah.
red flag. You said something very important about time it takes to actually put a proposal out there, vote on it, execute it, queue it. And that takes, for some DAOs, up to 14 days. And that's too much time if you need to upgrade for security specific reasons, right? So we also need to have mechanisms in place that we can use, hopefully not too often, to upgrade an emergency upgrade, essentially, right? A bug has been found in the smart contract. User tokens are at risk. What do? Call in the governance council, and then let's just pause the protocol, for example.
Aave did this recently.
I am actually part of the Polygon Protocol Council. Hey, there you go. So we're 2 out of the 13 signers of the Polygon Protocol Council, and we're responsible for reviewing, assessing, and approving changes made to the Polygon smart contracts. It's a big responsibility that we're taking very seriously, but that's not necessarily like Justin was explaining to everyone on the introductory call that in the future, we should have opcodes at the lower level that would essentially free us from these councils. But today, that's the best we can do, really, to, again, help with those emergency upgrades.
Yeah, and the thing is that, as you mentioned, like there's different types of upgrades. There are normal protocol upgrades that are like upgrading the system to make it better and whatever else. And those things have maybe less of a requirement. So maybe there's like 6 people that would need to sign instead of 10, for example, because they have a time lock on them. Like you sign it, you approve it, and it takes 14 days for that to actually go live, and it can be vetoed within those 14 days. Whereas for, as you mentioned, security kind of things, it has to be done like then and there. You can't wait, because if you wait, then you obviously run the risk of someone exploiting it, and then users lose their funds. And as I said, that happened with Aave recently, where there was a major bug that would have resulted in funds being lost, but they enacted their security kind of council to kind of like deal with that. But then the problem becomes like, okay, well, when does that security council go away? When does the team, does the DAO, does the whole ecosystem feel comfortable enough to remove this? It's hard, because there's no way to ever guarantee 100% that your thing's not going to have a bug in it. That's just the nature of software development. So you basically just, what you do is you let kind of like time play out. You let it bake there for a while. And then you kind of get more confidence over time, because you say, well, there's billions of dollars in this protocol, hasn't been exploited yet. We can have relative confidence that it's okay. But again, Aave V2 and V3 have been around for a while, and just now this was discovered, even after all of these independent audits that they've gone through, even these public audits where anyone can audit it and see the code. So it's very difficult when it comes to these governance things. And I totally understand teams that want to have this in place, because essentially it could, and most likely will, kill their entire project if everything was drained. And no one will trust it ever again. No one will want to use it. And then all that work you've put in to kind of build something, and all that money that you've spent, all that money you've invested, is just literally gone because of some bug that could have been prevented. So it's like the lesser of two evils: a security governance council or a bug that destroys your whole protocol. I know what I'd pick.
Yeah, for now, that's all we have to.
That's all we have. Like, there's not really much else. But then over time, you can kind of phase that out, but you can also give the power maybe to a DAO. But DAOs
time locks, I think what you've mentioned.
yeah,
like,
the time locks for upgrades are fine. Like, it's completely fine, and a lot of projects do that. And I actually, it's a red flag if they don't do that. If there's no time lock on an upgrade, a very big red
I
flag.
want to have the ability to rage quit, as Amin used to say.
Yeah.
Which is, you see something you disagree with, you should be able to bail, right? You should be able to withdraw your funds and let the DAO do whatever they want. And that's where the time lock really helps with that.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I did have a question. Just for the audience here, who are representing regulators, governments, policymakers, etc., who are actually exploring DAO models and DAO governance as a whole. One of the points you made around this like kind of DAO council for emergency power is what are some ways that we can give confidence to, again, those here who are exploring this about new ways to do like emergency meetings or emergency upgrades that make them feel more confident about exploring a DAO further, as opposed to, oh my goodness, you're saying I'm going to give control to 13 people. Who do I now go choose? Yeah. What ways can we improve the system?
I think we're getting to a stage where the level of maturity on that particular question is pretty good. So if you are getting into the space, you are thinking of spinning up a DAO, and you are worried about these topics, there's a few DAOs that you should really look into. Aave is one of them. Aave have basically 2 governance paths. A short executor and a long executor. Sorry for the technical jargon, but the first one does not require as much voting power, right? You can just propose to perhaps change certain risk parameters, but if you want to introduce like a new asset, that's a whole different change to the protocol, right? And we should be evaluating, and the voting structure should definitely be different. So yeah, look at how Aave does things. I think on the decentralization spectrum, I'd like to think that they're pretty out there. They take security very seriously, and they've been really good at sort of juggling between those two essentially contradictory aspects of our business, as Anthony was saying.
Yeah. But I also think that I agree with you, but to an extent, when what you were saying about like, having these 13 people on a multi-sig, I think that you always have to look at who these people are, what organizations they're a part of, what jurisdictions they are in, things like that, right? Because if it takes 10 people out of those 13 to do a security kind of pause of the protocol or something like that, the chances of those 10 people or 10 people out of those 13 colluding to do something nefarious, especially if they're completely separate from each other, they're part of different entities, they have very public personas, they're in different jurisdictions, is quite low. But whereas if you only have like a 3 or 5 multi-sig, obviously, and if it's all controlled by the same team, then obviously it's a very different thing. Because I think what people do in crypto a lot of the time is they equate multi-sigs like as if they're fungible, as if they're all the same thing. When I don't think they are. I really don't. But they are still a liability on things. But as I said, like I'd rather that than the alternative, which is the DAO actually having that ultimate control and the token holders having to come in and token vote, and then it delaying the response from a security perspective, and then it doesn't matter in the end because the funds are lost or something like that anyway. But it's a difficult, I mean, I think governance, not just in crypto, obviously, but just general, is the hardest thing humans will ever have to deal with. Like coordinating, governing else. I mean, we've been dealing with it for thousands of years, and the best thing we've come up with is democracy. I hate democracy. It's the least worst system, though. It's not the best. We could hopefully do better in the future, but that's how I generally think about governance, is that you always have to go towards the least worst system. And because trying to make a best system is there's no such thing. When humans are involved, there's no such thing.
And what about going beyond like plutocratic governing models? Like we have benefited so long for as what we shall call golden handcuff syndrome, where the vast majority of exit liquidity was not really there. Now recently, it's much easier to exit it off chain. It goes to show as asset prices have decreased over time as opposed to increasing. The higher the value means that people are willing to pay more to get off or equally transfer the asset to something more standard. But we still have these like extremely heavy plutocratic models where again, like you have who has the greatest value will always win. There was an amazing protocol a while ago called DAO at Right. I don't know if they're still operating or not, but they were actually analyzing different DAOs on chain to determine their Gini coefficient. And like one of them that I did some research on was on Lido. And I'm a big fan of Lido and Liquid, Liquid Stake. It's a great idea and it works to make sure we can actually have great validators in a secure network. But what they found was that it was actually more unequal than the most unequal nation in the world. Yeah. So like South Africa had a Gini coefficient of 0.63. I think they had a Gini coefficient on Lido of like 0.84 or 0.85. Wow.
Yeah,
it was significant. So how do we mitigate that and then equally like leverage more non-zero value tokens or like big proponent Soulbound tokens, like Soulbound governance tokens or something?
I guess just off that, because you mentioned governance tokens. If you have a governance tokens, make sure you use it for governance. Is my big message out there for projects. I don't want to name names, but very recently we've seen a big DAO do something that's potentially questionable, and they've gone ahead and done it, and then the token holders were like, hang on a sec, that doesn't look right, and they've organized their own vote to, believe it or not, decide whether they were going to sue the founding team for what they've just done, because they have a governance token, and that particular action was taken without asking governance for any type of input. They're like, this is what we're doing. And people felt like the monetary loss was not necessarily the main problem, which was like still like people thought that they would get, I think, between 5 and 10% of that pool directly to the treasury of that organization. But people were like, what the hell? Like, this is what I'm holding my tokens for. Like, you should be consulting me. I should have a say in this. And obviously they didn't. And the vote was successful by like 90% or something. So the next step will be probably legal proceedings for the founding team. So crazy world.
I did see that.
This was like yesterday.
I think yesterday. Yeah, I did say that. I thought it was kind of funny. Especially because of the project it happened to was all about governance, right? But I think one other note I wanted to make on this was that to get around the plutocratic stuff, there's probably 2 main things you can do. One is you have more than just token holder voting as part of your governance process. Optimism does this with something they call badge holders, where they give an NFT to a person, and then they separate it into 2 different houses. There's like the token house and the citizen's house, and then they have badge holders in the citizen's house and have the tokens that can vote on things. But they kind of have this thing where it's like, separation of powers like we have in normal democratic governments, right? You have different separations of powers. And then you kind of like have like, I guess you could call it a court or like a house or a senate or whatever you want to call it. So you're basically mirroring what we have in the existing kind of world. But I think that the separation of powers is always the way to go, to make sure that there's no kind of central point of failure there. But the second thing is also just having people who care about the protocol, who care about the project enough to actually participate in governance. Because really, if you create like this amazing kind of project and only 5 people care about it, then only 5 people are going to really be in the weeds doing the governance stuff, because governance is not very scalable. That's why we have representatives, right? That's why we have people that we elect to represent us, because you can't have millions of people having the same say on everything or looking at every bill and looking at every law and regulation. Same is true for crypto. You're not going to have millions of people looking at every change to the protocol. So you need to, you can delegate your tokens to people, which happens a lot already with these DAOs. And then it's kind of a, I guess, like liquid democracy where you don't have to wait 4 years to vote in a new representative. You basically get to just take your tokens from one that you disagree with and go delegate them to someone else. There may be time blocks in that, like maybe it's 14 days or something like that. But just separating powers out, having delegation in place, and really just having people that make not so much make the decisions, but have a say in governance, be the ones that actually deserve to have that say, not just because they have the most money, but because they've been involved with the project, they've got merit behind them, they're well known, they have a history of making decisions that actually aligned with the project itself. And yeah, I think that's really the end game for a lot of this stuff, because it's not scalable to expect everyone to pay attention to governance. And the problem with crypto is that because there's so much money on the line and because not many people pay attention, as I said, you typically see a lot of these treasuries being raided in subtle ways, where they'll just drain the treasury by paying exorbitant salaries and things like that. I think that's probably the worst thing, because that kills the protocol just slowly, right? You don't have to do anything nefarious. You just kill the protocol slowly by draining their funding. And then that's it. Well, they can't fund themselves anymore. They can't do upgrades. They lose to their competitors. So if you wanted to kill a project, that's all you have to do. And you make some money doing it too.
Well, firstly, thank you. And you've mentioned liquid democracy. And yesterday in one of our workshop conversations, we actually had this really interesting idea. It was like about the confluence between AI and blockchain. And actually having these representative agents being curated AI, where I can choose my preferences. I can then have almost like this AI agent go out there and work out which delegate actually matches my preferences, which can make it more efficient to vote per policy as opposed to a vote per representative. Just want to get your thoughts on that, because that was one of the discussions that we had, and I thought it was quite interesting, and it does lead towards that liquid democracy model.
I think it sounds great. It sounds just very hard to pull off, I think.
Yeah.
But like theoretically, just like listening to you explain the idea, I'm like, hell yeah, like sign me up. But yeah, I'm not an AI person, but it just like conceptually sounds very difficult.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in the same boat. I'm not an AI person either. I mean, it's kind of impossible to keep up with crypto and AI. Like, I just sticking to crypto for now. But yeah, I mean, I think anything that just like curates things and makes it easier for people to get kind of quick insight into what most aligns with their values. Like actually Coinbase does this for representatives in the US. They have a page where they basically tell you which representatives in the US have talked about crypto before, have pro-crypto policies or anti-crypto. So you can very quickly see, okay, if you're a single issue voter and that single issue is crypto, or maybe you're just crypto has like a lot of weight in how you vote for representatives, you can see, okay, well, this person's anti-crypto, I'm definitely not going to vote for them, right? And it shows both Democrats, Republicans, and also the independents. So if we had something like that, maybe for kind of different DAOs in the space, and show that, okay, well, this person, and maybe curated by an AI instead of a person, maybe this person has voted this way for these kind of changes, and that aligns mostly with what you want to see happen. Yeah, I mean, I think that would be great, because as I said, the main issue is always around scalability when it comes to humans and scaling up from there. And that's not going to go away. We're not a hive mind. We're all independent. We can't connect our brains to each other. We do that through communication. But at the end of the day, we have to have representatives no matter what it is. And I think that's, as I said earlier, where I said that democracy is the least worst system, is because we got to a point where we're like, okay, well, delegation sounds really good. But at the same time, there's a lot of people who delegate to the quote unquote wrong people, or people who shouldn't be in those positions. And then it just becomes a very messy thing of like, what's wrong, what's right. And then the ultimate goal of democracy is obviously to try and align everyone on, some sort of kind of values and mission and things like that. But it's so messy. I think if you want to study what DAO governance is going to end up looking like, you just study normal human governance for the last thousands of years. It's going to end up in the same way. I am very bullish on DAOs that end up like that, more so than ones that are trying to reinvent the wheel, so to speak. But we have new tools to do that with. Not to say that we shouldn't be using these new tools, new coordination mechanisms, because at the end of the day, I like to view blockchains as just coordination mechanisms and scaling up trust, scaling up human coordination, especially when it comes to financial applications, rather than just social ones. But because they're so intertwined, it becomes more difficult because, as I said, there's these financial incentives at play that are very subtle and people don't pay attention to it. And then by the time you're paying attention to it, you're like, where'd all the money go? So
Do you think that like merging of financial and non-financial, or social and financial, is actually a symptom of blockchain as opposed to what it has been traditionally?
no, it's not a symptom of blockchain, but blockchain makes it very, very transparent and obvious, as opposed to, I mean, it's an open secret that people lobby politicians, right? They lobby, and if you have a lot of money, you can do more lobbying. It's not a direct bribe, so to speak, but you lobby for what you want. And that's going to be the same in crypto, but crypto makes it just way more transparent, where everyone can see. Crypto makes everything more transparent. It's kind of funny when I talk to people, like, there's just scams everywhere in crypto. I'm like, have you met the real world? Like, have you been in the real world? There are scams literally everywhere in every industry. It's just that you don't see them. Imagine if we had like the ether scan for tourist scams, right? Like you could see every tourist getting scammed in real time. It'd be more than one a second, I'll tell you that, right? So that's kind of, it just makes everything way more transparent. And that's why we can talk about these things so openly, and we can design better systems due to that transparency, because we can react to things a lot faster. Again, goes back to liquid democracy stuff, where if a representative is doing something and you're seeing it maybe on a delayed schedule in the kind of real world, maybe it's months and it comes to light months later, and you see that, you probably can't vote them out until like, another 3 years, 2 years or something like that. And they're going to keep doing what they're doing. Whereas within crypto, it's like you see someone, oh, wow, this person voted this way. I don't agree with them. I can quickly take my tokens from them and give them to someone else. And I've done this a few times myself with my governance tokens. I'm just like, I don't like how you voted on that. That's silly. Maybe I should have given them the direct feedback. I try not to cause too much drama, but I've done that myself. And I think that that's a voice as well. Taking the tokens away, that's a signal to people. It's like, hey, like, I didn't agree with how you voted. I'm going to go with this person, how they voted. And there was actually like one vote recently that was quite funny in the Arbitrum DAO for the incentives that they were giving out to people of ARB tokens. There was one around Lido. So they were going to give incentives to Lido, but everyone's like, Lido's already huge. Like, why are we incentivizing more growth of Lido? And we've been talking about how Lido is a risk to Ethereum, the protocol, if it gets too big. I mean, it already is too big, but and then there was a vote, and it was a pretty close vote, but ended up being no, let's not give them incentives. And I think that, it was kind of only a bunch of people that swayed that vote because they had the most tokens allocated to them. But if someone was to take tokens away from one person, give them to another because they voted a certain way, you could do that because you're like, oh, I didn't agree with the way you voted on that. I'm going to go here now. And that's like a signal that you can read.
Awesome. It works. Steve asked him this little trick, right? If you ever need to be aware of time, just walk towards a panel, phone in, and we're good. Honestly, I could listen to you all day. Please somehow get him onto the podcast sometimes. I listen.
Oh, yeah. Should. I don't really do guest podcasts, but I'll make an exception for you.
Oh, for me, do not lose anyone. Okay.
Yeah.
I highly recommend everyone just following their journey, their content. Obviously, the Daily Way, especially, it's posting nearly every day at this point.
Yeah, I'm not this week because I'm here, but yeah, as often as I can. It's nearly every weekday, yeah, for about 30 minutes.
If he goes quiet, don't be worried, okay? He's just speaking to people in person.
Yeah, exactly. I've left my den.
Then, right. And as well, like Medi with like Lighthouse, we wouldn't have Ethereum as we do today. And again, like everyone here, even this room on the panel too, like we all are here enabling each other's jobs because we are this ecosystem together. Might it be like co-developing or making Lighthouse or having a podcast or being a researcher, working regulation and policy making or running these governance conversations. It's all one, we all play one big part together. So this was the last session of the entire Block 9. And now we're just going to have the closing plenary and then we're going to be off. The biggest community in DeFi and Web3 and blockchain in Australia, Oz DeFi Association, is hosting an event upstairs from the area that we had our events on day 2 and 3 at York Street. So I'll be heading there after. If you would like to come, just come with me. But beyond that, let's close it off and just thank you so much, everyone. Thank you.
You.